congregation that called itself the Church of God. Well, at one point, some of the members in that church got upset with some of the other members, accusing them of holding the wrong beliefs and engaging in the wrong practices. So those members separated themselves from the Church of God and founded a new congregation, which they proceeded to name the True Church of God. Well, guess what? After a little while, some of the members in that church got upset with some of the others and accused them of holding the wrong beliefs and engaging in the wrong practices. So they removed themselves from the True Church of God and went off and formed another congregation, which they proceeded to name the Only True Church of God. What are we supposed to do when we disagree with other people? In particular, what are we supposed to do when we're Christians and we believe that this particular belief is the right one? But then there are other people over here who also say that they are Christians, but they believe almost the exact opposite thing. What are we supposed to do about that? Essentially, that is the issue that's being raised here in this passage that we just heard from the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. You see, Paul had spent about a year and a half in Corinth, meeting with people, preaching to them, and helping them to form a Christian congregation. But then he had moved on to another city to begin forming another Christian congregation there. But here in this passage in 1 Corinthians, it seems that a particular issue had come up there in Corinth that Paul had not given them any specific guidance about it. And they were struggling with what to do about it. At the heart of that dispute there in Corinth was an issue that we might have a hard time appreciating. But for them, it was a matter of religious life or death. You see, at the heart of the dispute there in Corinth was the question, are Christians allowed to eat meat that's been sacrificed to an idol or not? In that day, in Corinth, and in virtually every other city in the Roman Empire, there were countless temples that had been constructed to Zeus and Apollo and Athena and all the other many pagan gods. And people would take animals to those temples to offer them as sacrifices. And then afterwards, the meat from those sacrifices was taken into the marketplace and sold to people who could then take it home and cook it and eat it. As a result, most of the meat that was available in the grocery stores there in Corinth was meat that had originally been sacrificed to one of those pagan gods. And so among the Christians there in Corinth, there were some who refused to eat that meat and believed that anyone who did eat that meat could not possibly be a Christian. From their point of view, anyone who disagreed with them had to be some kind of heretic. To their way of thinking, to eat meat that had been sacrificed to Zeus or Apollo or Athena or one of the other gods was basically saying that you believed in and were devoted to that God and not to Jesus. And so from their way of looking at things, anyone who thought differently from them and ate that meat was nothing more than a godless heretic. But in the Corinthian church, there were others who felt the exact opposite way. From their point of view, there was only one God, the God and Father of Jesus Christ. And so, from their point of view, when people offered sacrifices to Zeus or Apollo or Athena or one of the other many gods, they were offering sacrifices to no one. They were offering sacrifices to nothing. As a result, from their point of view, the meat that was then put for sale in the market was just meat, nothing more and nothing less. And so, from their perspective, they went ahead and bought that meat and cooked it and ate it because they didn't see what the big problem was. And in their opinion, those on the other side of the issue, those who refused to eat that meat, were nothing more than a bunch of superstitious dummies. But when Paul then writes this letter to the Corinthians, notice the approach that he takes. He doesn't come right out and give his solution to their problem. Instead, he begins by noticing how both sides in that conflict are emphasizing what they know. We know that eating meat sacrificed to idols is wrong. Well, we know that eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols is perfectly acceptable. Yes, knowing the truth is important, Paul says. But if you know the truth, but don't have love, then it's all for nothing. It's like what Paul will say later on in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. But having love for those who disagree with us, having love for those who are different from us in some way, is not always the easiest thing for us to do. For instance, during the Salem witch trials of the 1600s, almost every accuser lived on the west side of the village. And almost every person who was accused of being a witch lived on the east side. What historians have found is that those who lived on the western side of Salem tended to be more rural and held more conservative, traditional views on things, while those on the east side of the village tended to be more urban and generally had more progressive mindsets. For instance, on the east side of town, there were a number of women who had inherited large amounts of property and money, something that many on the western side of the town thought was an abomination